Okay, good afternoon, class. Good to see everybody today. Hope you're having a good day. Here we are in the 9th week of class, session 2 in the 9th week. So I guess this is lesson number 18, I believe, if I'm doing my math correctly. So last time we started chapter 10 and dealing with perfect, or your book calls it pure competition. I usually hear perfect competition means the same thing. It's one of the 4 principal market structures that we'll examine in this course. And this is one we're all familiar with. We recognize attributes of perfect competition, if you will, when it exists around us. Or we may decry the lack of competition when such is the case around us. I think I related last time the fact that I grew up in a small town and the grocery industry was not very competitive, and so my mother would complain with basically this quote. She said, "We need more competition around here." Okay, that so-and-so store, it was a family grocery store, so I won't use the name, but they need some competition. So we've all been there. We recognize when competition does not exist. And so what do we mean by perfect competition and so forth? So we described this one of 4 market structures last time, what perfect competition is. It's characterized, just briefly here, by kind of maybe, I guess, 4 traits that we mentioned last time. These are spelled out in your book, beginning on page 197. Let me just say here that, in fact, I may have this on a very boring looking chart, but I'll go to the dot cam here. So these are attributes of perfect or pure competition that should make sense to you today. Is that first off, there's a very large number of sellers. That was a problem in our hometown. There was only one grocery store, okay? So regardless of whether you're really talking about a product industry or a resource industry, okay, a competition will be exhibited if there's a large number of sellers. So whether you're selling a finished product or whether even the labor market has varying degrees of competition depending on where the workers work. Okay, so if you think about it a second, if there's low-skilled labor, a market for low-skilled labor in a region, maybe we just need folks who can help with, and I don't mean to disparage any particular line of work, but some lines of work don't require that much training. So maybe, it could be drywalling or roofing, something like that. You don't exactly have to go to college to do. A lot of times there's a lot of people who will do that kind of work, okay? We won't get into that too much because there's other factors, I suppose, as I think about it. But if you have a lot of people willing to sell their labor, you're talking about a competitive labor resource market. So the grocery market may be competitive if there's a lot of grocery stores selling goods, cans of pork and beans and so forth, or a labor market, resource market can be competitive. In both cases, you'd have a large number of sellers. There's also a standardized product. Nobody can claim that their particular good or service is special. So at the other extreme, perhaps, if you think about it, a resource market for a moment, think about the NFL for a minute, okay? They want to hire workers, if you will, players, but those players have to have a lot of talent. You have to have a lot of talent to be in the NFL. And so there aren't that many people who really can play in the NFL, if you will. I know it's competitive, and to some extent there's always going to be a certain percent of those who vie for those jobs that would make it in the NFL. Maybe it's 1% or 1% or 1%, I don't know. But at any rate, there aren't too many people who qualify for playing in the NFL. So it's not a very competitive resource market. That is to say, if you look at the supply side of the NFL, those who supply their services, if you will, They have market power. They can command a salary. So you hear of these people coming out, maybe they're a runner-up for the Heisman Trophy or something. They're not exactly what we would call a price taker. As you see, this is the third aspect or feature of perfect competition. The products are not standardized. They're differentiated in the NFL, okay? So lack of competition there's not a perfect competition situation. So NFL players, people who go from college to the NFL, if they're a star, they're certainly not a price taker, okay? They can command a certain salary, if you will. But in a perfect competition situation, the sellers are price takers. They receive whatever price is being offered to them in the marketplace. So I mentioned last time, agricultural markets are very competitive, okay? So a wheat farmer, I keep going, but I like the example of a wheat farmer because it seems to be ideal in so many respects in exhibiting these things here. There's not so much free entry and exit in wheat farming, but the first three characteristics seem to attend wheat farming in that, wheat farmers are price takers. So even the largest wheat farmer in the world cannot say, you know what, I'm going to drive up the price of wheat this year. I'm just going to plant barley instead. That's a ludicrous statement. Even if you own 500,000 acres of wheat, you're just a little bitty person, little bitty farmer on the global scale. So you don't have the ability to drive up the price of your product, okay? So that's what we mean when you say a price taker. Another way of saying that is there's no market power. No market power. Okay, we use that term a lot too. By market power, we mean the ability to raise the price of your produce, the ability to raise your price without losing market share. Okay, so there's no market power when you have perfect competition. So your agricultural markets are this way because the world's just too big generally. Now I suppose if you're talking about the farmer's market in a small town and every Saturday, my wife goes to the farmer's market, okay, Wednesdays and Saturdays. And perhaps week after week there's someone who's established themselves as the supplier of whatever, tomatoes or what have you. Then I suppose that person, at least for a brief amount of time, could drive up the price of tomatoes, okay, obviously. But there again, you would not, in that instance, you would not have a perfectly competitive situation. Agricultural markets are competitive though. When you extend beyond the small location, you go out to the global level, okay? Because there's lots of tomato farmers around. So, and why is there lots of tomato farmers? Well, I was joking with my wife last night. We were sitting in the backyard and we have a 1 acre lot. And in the backyard's most of it. And I said, hey, we could grow a lot of tomatoes on this. She grows these cherry tomatoes and so forth. And I said, well, we could grow all kinds of tomatoes here on our 1 acre. And that's true. It's free entry and exit. Okay, even in town, okay, where we live in town, well, we could grow tomatoes. All you need is a little tomato seed, I guess, and a rototiller, and you're in business. So there's low barriers to entry and so forth. So you're talking again about a very competitive situation there. And so these are, you should recognize these as attributes to perfect competition. One I want to focus on next is I want to focus on this one here. Suppliers are price takers. And this is, we can picture this situation in the following way. I drew a diagram last time, so today I'm going to kind of be doing some drawing, and I want you to bear with me. In fact, I'll be a little silly here today because last time I ran off and said, where's my ruler? And sometimes I come into class and I say, I left my calculator, can't find my calculator or something. So I always have to have a straight edge. So this, leaving my office just a moment ago, I said, here's a straight edge laying on my desk, and I'll guarantee you no one else will claim it. So there it is. A little silly, it's my nameplate. Okay, I guess if it gets in the way, I'll turn it upside down, but then I can't see it. So at any rate, let's draw a little picture to match what we were talking about last time. And I want to make, a couple of points here with this picture. So I guess I could have already had this pre-cooked, but I don't know, it takes just a little bit to draw a picture. So we're going to talk about perfect competition. Now, I think last time I made a distinction between the individual, so we'll talk about the individual supplier, okay? Maybe it's wheat farming, whatever it is. And I'm sorry. Oops, I put it in the wrong place. Let's talk about the market, and over here we'll put the individual supplier, okay? Individual supplier. And I want to use the same numbers I had last time. I had this little, but first off, you have a supply and demand curve, of course, in the market. And the market itself at equilibrium will establish a price that prevails. So I'm going to say $10 a bushel, say. So this is per bushel for wheat. That's probably high for a bushel of wheat, I'm pretty sure it is, but let's just use that for a minute. Now the thing is, actually an individual supplier, if you got on the microscopic scale, the individual supplier could shift this demand curve, this market demand curve, a little bit to the right or left, depending on how much of their acreage they plant in wheat. I mean, you got 500,000 acres in Nebraska, you're going to plant it all in wheat, then maybe, remember, number of sellers is a determinant of demand. So perhaps you could move this just a little bitty bit to the right. Or if you decide to not plant wheat at all, you could move this just a little bitty bit to the left. You could decrease demand. Okay? But again, the point is here, but it's important we recognize this. We'll circle back around to it. But, because you're so small on the world stage, that whatever you do, you're not going to affect that price appreciably. Okay? So you are a price taker. Again, this is something we recognize as being a feature of perfect competition. So what I'm going to do here then is I'm going to draw a horizontal line at the market price, and I'm going to call this price here set by the market. I'm going to call this the individual demand curve. So it's a little different than the market demand. This is MKT, if you will. This is the individual demand curve. So this is, as far as the individual wheat farmer goes, this is the demand for their wheat, okay? And you remember, a demand curve gives you the relationship between the price people are willing to pay and the quantity you'd bring to market. So in the market, the more that's brought to market, then the less people are willing to pay. But again, you can't influence the market that much, the price of wheat. So as far as you're concerned, your demand curve, as far as you care as a farmer, is a horizontal line. Okay, so this is also going to be at $10. Okay, just say $10. I used that last time, and maybe you bring 1,000 bushels to market, typically in a week. Of course, I know wheat farming's seasonal, but let's just free things up a little bit. Every week you bring 1,000 to market, and so guess what? Your revenue for 1,000, I'm just going to say here, revenue for 1,000 bushels of wheat is how much? Well, it's 10 times 1,000. So 10 times 1,000 is $10,000. Hope that makes sense. So the top line on your income statement, what you bring in, is $10,000. Easily enough to see. Okay. Now, so the next week, you say, I'm going to bring one more bushel to wheat than I typically bring in. Okay. So I want to bring this out just a little bit here. So maybe I have to kind of scale this. But let's say you want to bring 1,001 bushels to market. All right. So now your total revenue, the revenue at 1,001 bushels, of course, is 10 times 1,001. And what's that going to be, class?
10,000.
Yeah. 10,010, right? All right. Okay, so there's a couple things I want us to see here. First off, the marginal revenue. We've computed marginal cost, marginal utility, so forth before. We use the same relationship here that we've used before. I'm going to compute the marginal revenue on the 101st unit, or the 1,001st unit. And so this is the change in total revenue divided by the change in quantity. Okay, hope that makes sense. Just as before we had change in total utility, it would change in quantity and so forth. So what would this be? This would be 10,000, 10, okay, that number minus 10,000 over 1, because you go from here to here, that's just 1 unit. I hope you can read my writing here. But the numerator has a difference of 10. It's 10 over 1. It's $10. Does that make sense? The marginal revenue on the 1,001th unit is $10. In other words, the revenue rectangle expands from this size now, and it becomes this amount. And so it's this addition to the revenue rectangle, if you will, that gives us the marginal revenue of the next unit. And I think we can see the marginal revenue for the 1,002nd is going to be $10, and for the next, it's always going to be $10. Okay. Now this is a feature of perfect competition. We're not going to see this with monopoly or other market structures, but this is critical. We see that the marginal revenue is equal to the price. Whatever the price is set in the marketplace is going to define what the marginal revenue is for the individual supplier. Okay, so we kind of see that obviously here and so forth. Now, so I'm going to say the individual demand is the marginal revenue curve. And then it also doubles as something else. There's 3 things that line represents. Not only is the individual demand the marginal revenue for the ith supplier or what have you. I could put an I here if you want. But it also, if you compute the average revenue, AVG revenue, I'm going to call this AR. AR, whether we're talking about the revenue at 1,000 units or the revenue at 1,001, it's always the revenue divided by the quantity. Just use one of these. Say this one right here. If I use at 1,000 units, the revenue is $10,000, and there's 1,000 units. Okay? Well, I'm sorry. There we go. The average revenue is also equal to the price. Okay? Could have also used $10,010 over 1,001, right? Or this is equal to this, in which case you still get $10, the price. This will go into here 10 times. This will go in here 10 times. Okay? So this is equal to $10. So one other thing to note about this line established by the marketplace is this is equal to the average revenue. These are things that are not going to exist when we look at other market structures. But for perfect competition, the supplier in perfect competition, it is always the case that the marginal revenue equals the average revenue equals the individual demand. That's a very important concept that we look at and we will make use of here in perfect competition, not in monopoly, so forth, but in perfect competition. Okay, so why is this critical? Okay, first off, we've talked about the marginal revenue, marginal cost rule, or what level of output for a supplier will maximize profit. The output that maximizes always net benefit for a producer or for let's use the word supplier, is that which makes The marginal benefit equal to the marginal cost, or more specifically here, marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Okay, we've looked at this before. If your goal, and presumably in a capitalistic society, you as a supplier, you want to maximize profit. That will occur when this is the case. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. I made this little joke back there. It wasn't a silly statement, but maybe it stuck in your mind. But I said, if you're going to tattoo one economic principle on your body somewhere, well, this is the one you want to put on your body. Okay? Being a little facetious there. If you were a physicist, it might be E equals mc squared, or what have you. If you were a historian, maybe it would be 1492, because Columbus sailed the ocean blue there. Battle of Hastings was in 1066 or something like that. Whatever. But in economics, especially microeconomics, you want to remember that the producer wants to produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Okay, I think we're going to see that more clearly here when we look at a picture that's partially established by this demand curve. So now we're going to focus on the individual seller, and I'm going to put this curve on here, and we'll come back and see why it is, if we're a little shaky on that right now, why it is that an individual supplier wants to produce where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. So let's go back here and draw another picture here for the individual supplier. And we're going to back up here and remember that you got price going this way, and this is the individual supplier. So I'm going to put a small q here. Sometimes we'll do that. But remember, there's three very important cost curves in the short run. Everything here we're talking about is in the short run, okay? But in the short run, recall you have an average total cost curve, ATC, and you have an average variable cost curve, AVC, okay? And then connecting these vertices here is another cost curve. And what would it be? It would be your marginal cost. So we don't want to go back through and talk about that anymore. We beat that to death. But these curves always describe, it doesn't matter what market structure you're in, these will always describe short-run cost curves, okay? Okay, because of the law of diminishing returns to your variable input. Maybe it's labor. In fact, that's the way we looked at it, was labor and so forth. Okay, so we have a marginal cost curve here. It goes through these two things right here. Now, what we're saying is that there's an individual demand curve established by the market that's also on this diagram too. I'm just going to put it on here for a moment. I'm just going to say it's up here, okay? So let's just kind of go across here. And this is the price from the marketplace. It's also the marginal revenue curve. And it's also the average revenue, AR curve. But marginal revenue is what we care about, okay? And so what I'm saying is that the smart profit maximizing producer will try to equate marginal revenue and marginal cost. That is to say, they'll produce at a level of output equal to Q star. You see, that's where these two curves intersect. Okay, now why? All right, first off, we see that the profit that this farmer or whatever is going to earn is determined by taking the revenue and subtracting your total cost. Let's think about what that would look like. Revenue is price times quantity. So at this level of output here, do you see that the total revenue would be this big rectangle here? Do y'all see that? Does that make sense? We've kind of talked about revenue rectangles before when we looked at a demand curve and we were inscribing these rectangles underneath a demand curve or market demand curve that was downward sloping. Same thing, we're inscribing a rectangle within an individual demand curve. This is, and I want to make sure we understand that's the individual demand curve. So the revenue is the price. In that case, remember, it was like $10 times 1,000 bushels of wheat. That's how we got that. So it's this rectangle. In fact, that's what we did here when we hashed this in. All right, so revenue is this. So remember that profit, whether it's economic profit or accounting profit, is revenue minus total cost. Now, actually, let me be careful here. Accountants only include accounting cost here, explicit cost. But we're economists, so we're going to talk about economic profit. So really, economic profit is revenue minus total cost. Well, revenue is this big rectangle. Okay? So we want to maximize profit. Sometimes people get a little confused when they do this stuff. They say, I want to maximize revenue. No, you don't want to maximize revenue. You want to maximize profit. Okay? So a business's performance is measured by the bottom line. In fact, that's where you hear this statement. What's the bottom line? Okay? The bottom line on an income statement is what's left over out of revenue when you subtract costs. And they call this profit or income. Okay? So there's a difference between revenue and income. So for the top line is revenue, bottom line on an income statement is profit or income. All right, enough of that. So this is the big rectangle. How would we find total cost? Any idea? How could I graph that? All right, well, I got this average total cost curve. The average total cost. I could put some numbers in here in just a second. Let's say that this is $10. I may have to erase this in a minute because I may use this again. Let's say this is $10. I'm going to look at the average total cost curve, and I want to say, oh, this looks to be, and I come over here, this looks to be $8. I just have to measure that. So that's to say on each unit I deliver to market, I'm going to have a $2 profit. And if I deliver 1,000 units to market, then my profit would be $2. That would be this distance right here, $2 times 1,000 units. So my profit would be $2,000. Or graphically, it would be, I kind of messed it up there, but graphically, it would be the area of this rectangle. Profit. I want to use let's go ahead and get used to a little notation here. Pi. Pi, capital Pi, generally in economics means profit. So that's profit, okay? I'll go ahead and introduce that because it makes things simpler. But that's this region right here. Okay, that's profit. And you're going to see here, you should see that if I produce something less or more, this rectangle is going to change shape, right? So if I produce and sell in 1 week's time less than 1,000 units, this rectangle gets shorter this way. Maybe it gets a little fatter, but it gets shorter, okay? And so that's going to affect the area of the rectangle. And if it gets shorter more than it gets fatter, fatter is going to expand the area, but getting shorter this way is going to diminish the area, then this rectangle, its area would get smaller. So I submit to you, and you can try something, and they show you numerically in your book, that this is the biggest that rectangle can be. This rectangle will be smaller if you produce anything to the left or to the right of this level of output, at which marginal cost equals marginal revenue. That rule that I said is what you want to tattoo on your dog, cat, or whatever it is. This determines this, which maximizes your profit. To the left of there, if you were to produce less than 1,000 units, if you think about it a second, maybe 999 units. On that last unit, the marginal benefit or marginal revenue would exceed the marginal cost. Okay, so think about that a second. If the last unit you produced brings in more revenue than the cost, it means that was a profitable unit to produce. You need to produce a little more. Most likely, you need to crank up that production a little more. Because all the while, when you increase production, you're driving up marginal cost. So that $10 may exceed the $10 being the marginal revenue on the 999th unit. It's going to exceed the marginal cost, which maybe is $9.98. So produce another one. And you're going to drive up that marginal cost until it meets $10, matches $10. Now, if you go too far, say if you produce 1,001 units, that last unit you produced came with a higher marginal cost than the revenue it generated. So the marginal cost there would be more than $10. And it says you shouldn't have produced that. You're cutting into your profits now. You may still have a big profit, but it's not as big as it is here. So if you overproduce, this rectangle would be out here. Maybe it would be right here, and it would come across this way. So you can still draw a rectangle, but the thing is the rectangle wouldn't be as big. Okay? I hope we see that, this conceptually and so forth. So this is a very important diagram here. We're going to be coming back to, and I'll be making some sketches on this and so forth. So a couple things to note before we go on. All right, I got these three cost curves. Remember these two, the AVC curve approaches, they're both U-shaped, but it approaches the ATC curve to the right because the difference between them, which is average fixed cost, okay, ATC is the sum of these two. This goes to zero. Your average fixed cost goes to zero with increasing levels of output. So you got, all this fits. What's kind of neat about this, it just kind of fits together. We've shown how you have these U-shaped curves. They have to be U-shaped by diminishing returns. We use the average marginal rule to establish the fact that the marginal always goes through the extreme of the average, in this case the minimum of the two average cost curves, which that in itself implied that the average variable cost, since it's less than the average total cost curve, has to be to the left a little bit of the average total cost, because this has to be here in order for that to be U-shaped. But it also exists because the difference between the two goes to zero for large levels of output. So all this fits together. What's neat about this, when you start graphing this and looking at it, and you do a lot of this in microeconomics, okay? If you like this sort of thing, study microeconomics. You get into comparative statics and all that. You draw diagrams for so many things, and it's just kind of neat that these things exist. So at any rate, let's focus now. Enough on that advertisement. Let's focus on this a little bit. This is profit. All right? The whole rectangle is revenue. Okay? So remember, so this would be the revenue at 1,000 units would be $10,000. The profit was $2,000. And how did we get that? We took $10,000 and subtracted the total cost. The total cost was $8 times 1,000. So this rectangle here, which I'll hash this way, okay, I hope you can make that out, is your total cost, TC. So this is total cost, this is profit, add them together, gives you revenue. Does that make sense? Okay, pretty straightforward, I think. But I'm trying to get us to think in terms of diagrams and so forth. Now, total cost we can break apart. Remember, total cost has fixed cost and has variable cost. So we could break this rectangle up into these two costs, if we wanted, by referencing the average variable cost curve. Okay, so if you go to the AVC curve and you identify this point, and you come across here, okay, and I don't know, it looks, let's just say that this is $5. Okay, then I'm just kind of making these numbers up. But what you see here is that the variable cost would be $5 times 1,000 units at Q star at this optimal level. Now, at some other level of output, it would vary, but this is $5,000. Variable cost is $5,000. Okay, fixed cost, how much is that going to be, class? Well, it'd be 3 times 1,000, right? So over here, I'm going to have $3 times 1,000. So where did I get that? Okay. So I'm going to put a plus here to get our total cost. 3. Well, that's the area of this rectangle here. Okay, so I got total cost here. I probably should have put that on the line here. But I think I'll call this total fixed cost, TFC. And this is TVC. Okay? And you put those together, you get total cost. Okay, so again, that rectangle is this $3 difference times this length here, if you will. So there's 4 rectangles of importance here. 4 that I want us to grab onto now, be very important to us as we go forward, is that there's the big revenue rectangle, and then there's the cost rectangle, which can be subdivided into total fixed cost, TFC, Tennessee Fried Chicken. No, it's Kentucky Fried Chicken. TFC and total variable cost. That's total cost here. Subtract that from revenue, you got profit, okay? So does that make sense? And this is important things. Now, the rest of the chapter is kind of going to explore this diagram, a good bit of the rest of the chapter. We're in the short run. Later in the chapter, we'll get into the long run. But for today, most of what we'll do today, we're going to stay in the short run. So these cost curves continue to look this way for a producer. But the market, what's going on in the market, can do different things here. In a period of time, heck, this demand curve could shift from left to right and so forth. And anytime one of these curves shifts, say the demand curve shifts from D1 to D2, then that's going to, what would that do here to the individual demand curve? It's going to pull it what? Going to pull it up, right? So, I mean, here's the deal. If the market demand curve increases, shifts to the right, the individual demand curve shifts up. Anything that shifts up the equilibrium or moves up the equilibrium point in the market's going to shift up the individual demand. So it could be an increase in demand or a decrease in supply, okay? It could have a leftward shift in the supply curve. Either one of those, but let's think about demand for a second. So it means suddenly people want to buy wheat. There's good news that came out about eating whole grain wheat and all that. So you want to eat wheat. Maybe they found a cure for celiac disease or something, okay? I don't know too much about that, but I know people who can't eat wheat bread, and suddenly there's maybe a new pill or something. So I can eat wheat now. Well, that would increase the demand for the market demand for wheat. So it may equilibrate now at $11. So that's going to bring this up. It's going to shift up the demand curve. So this curve would move up, right? And so the individual supplier, if you will, they're going to want to expand their output because they're always going to want to seek the intersection between the marginal revenue and marginal cost. In that case, the marginal revenue curve shifted upward. So the marginal revenue curve can shift up, can shift down. Imagine for a moment, though, that there's a decrease in demand, just a decrease in demand in the market. So the market demand shifts to the left. If that's the case, then the individual demand curve is going to shift down, right? So imagine if the individual demand curve started to shift down. Now, here's what your book's going to look at. You're going to look at 2 possibilities here. We're going to go forward in our thinking on this. If the individual demand curve shifts far enough down, then the typical supplier, if their cost curves don't shift at all, the typical supplier is not going to earn a profit. Is that right? You see that? Let me sketch over this. Okay, this is really, I'm being old school today. You're looking at an old math teacher anyway, and I'm getting older all the time, but I'm used to doing things on the chalkboard or whiteboard, but I can kind of see right where I was. I could have copied this before class, but alas, I had a lunch opportunity, and I knew y'all would be patient with me here. So here we go. It's the same curves. Price, marginal cost, average total cost, and average variable cost. Whoops, y'all can't see anything on the edge there? All right. So we had, you may be able to see through my paper there a little bit, not very high tech. Here's my, I remember, you got your name on something, no one's going to take it from, no one's going to steal it, right? No one's going to claim it. I remember once I ran for office, I'll never forget this, and a big windstorm came through town. I'm not a very good politician, I'm lousy, okay, but I had a few big signs, not very many, with my name on it. It's like, yeah, that's my sign blowing across Main Street. So someone on my campaign, I put most of my signs out, but it didn't get anchored down very well. It's not like I can say, that's not mine. Well, this one's mine. But at any rate, So I think you see here, this line here. So what if it comes down here a little bit? As long as it's above this point right here, you're going to earn a profit. Does that make sense? Wherever it is, it's kind of artificial that we happen to draw it right at where we did, but what you see is that the price established in the marketplace could be below the minimum point on your average total cost curve. Could be below. Something could happen in the market. It could be a decrease in demand. So people, man, there's more news that came out on eating wheat or eating tomatoes, you know, the pesticides they're using causes cancer. So whatever it is, there could be a decrease in demand. And so in the short run, we could have a decrease in the individual demand or price down to this level here, okay? In which case, it's kind of hard to see here, but I should have probably drawn it a little more convincingly here. But again, you want to equate marginal revenue. It doesn't matter what the price is. You want to equate marginal revenue with marginal cost. And so that's going to happen here, okay, at this point. Well, I'm going to have to zoom in so I can convince you of this because I didn't draw this as well as I should have. But I want to draw this rectangle again, okay, that exists between total cost and total revenue. Now, do you see this time that, okay, we're to the left of this point here. This is where marginal cost equals minimum average total cost. So in this region here, do you see that total cost exceeds revenue? Is that obvious? Total cost exceeds revenue. Because the price you're able to charge, the price is this distance. On maybe this is, and it's going to be less than 1,000 units as we had before, but let's just say it's 900 units. Just say that, just to say that. The total revenue is this solid rectangle here, but the total cost is this. Total cost exceeds total revenue. So you have negative profit, okay? Negative profit. Because, or since, total revenue is exceeded by total cost. This is the total cost. Now, so the total cost here is, it's no longer 10, maybe it's $9. I'm just putting some numbers in here. $9. Instead of 10 as it was up here, it's $9. And maybe this distance here is $9.20. Does that make sense? $9.20. We'll look at the numbers in your text in a minute. So you're producing and selling 900 units. Each unit comes at an average total cost of $9.20, and you're selling them for $9. So guess what? You have a negative profit. The profit now, pi, is the revenue minus the cost. Revenue minus total cost. And what is this? This is the revenue is $9 times 900. And the total cost is $9.20 times 900. Does that make sense? And so even this one I can do in my head. This is $8,100. Well, this is going to be more than $8,100. Maybe y'all, Glenn, do you happen to know? That's right. Yeah, I'll look here. 9.2. I got my handy dandy TIBA plus. Don't leave home without this, right? You never know. 8280. Okay, I think that's what I got here. 8280. All right, 8280. Which is a negative $180. So first thing I want you to see is if the price falls far enough, our profit's negative. Okay? If the price falls below minimum average total cost, then this Q star, which equates marginal revenue equals marginal cost, the intersection of these two curves, is going to be such that my revenue rectangle is smaller than my total cost rectangle. Okay? I could still take the total cost, though, this 8280, and break it apart into total fixed costs and total variable costs by drawing a line here and coming across and measuring those two rectangles. I could still do that. But the point I want to make here is I have a negative I have a negative profit. I have a loss, okay? And I think this is worth drawing and thinking about and so forth. So here's a question for you, okay? We're in the short run. Now, by the short run, we mean the length of time. And your book is a little more specific on this. I think that they probably spell out again for us what short run means. Just kind of looking here. I don't remember exactly where it is. But in the short run, you have these U-shaped cost curves and so forth. You have diminishing marginal returns in the short run, but you also, it's the length of time in which, you can't move capital in and out of the industry. If you can double your plant size, or someone else can come in and build a factory to compete with you and so forth, you're in the long run, okay? Everything's variable in the long run. So again, we're in the short run here. So in the short run, there's only a fixed number of firms and so forth doing this, so you have a short run cost curve. So here's the deal. We're in the short run. There's not enough time in our time frame. It's not long enough for firms to leave the industry. It's really not. It's too short. There's a reason, okay? We'll see here in a minute. But it takes a while. If you've hired workers, you sign contract, not workers so much, but machine rental. Workers, maybe you can hire and fire almost at will. But machine rental, and you're locked into a lease on the equipment and property and so forth. We all know if you own an apartment, the long run is the length of your lease, okay? And so forth. So guess what? In the short run, you have some fixed cost. Okay, in the short run, this is a key thing. Fixed cost, or total fixed cost, is greater than zero in the short run. So if you have some fixed cost, if all your fixed costs are fixed, okay, that's true by definition in the short run. My question here is, what's a smart thing for this supplier to do? Should they just shut down? You think it's tempting, all right? I'll just say, if your profit is negative, come down here, man, you lost $180 this week. You may say, well, I'm going to quit, all right? $180, I'm going to quit. I'm going to shut down. For this supplier, would that be a smart thing for them to do? What do you think? Well, no. I'll tell you why. No, because this is their revenue here, this rectangle. And notice something here. Even though they're earning a negative profit, they're still able to cover all of their variable cost. In other words, they're still able to pay their workers, if you will. Okay, because the total variable cost is this rectangle. Remember, this is TVC. And this rectangle up here, from here to here, is TFC at 900 units. So total fixed cost really doesn't change, okay, but the total variable cost will with output. And so, these are shaped just so that if I expand output, this rectangle up here gets fatter and thinner, but the area always stays the same. Total fixed cost is fixed, okay? It doesn't change, but this one will change. So I want you to see something here, is that this rectangle, this is the height, but refers to the revenue. The revenue you bring in covers all of your fixed cost. Covers all of your variable cost and a portion of your fixed cost, okay? So what I contend here is the smart thing to do is do not shut down. Continue to operate in the short run. In the short run. Why? Because the revenue covers all of your total variable cost. revenue exceeds total variable cost. That means you got a little left over out of your revenue to pay down your fixed cost. So what are we talking about fixed cost? Perhaps the lease on the building. Let's just put a number in here. $1,000 a month. You signed a contract for 12 months beginning in January. Here we are in March. You say, man, price of my good went down. I should shut down. Guess what? That total fixed cost is not going away. So you got to make a $1,000 payment every month. Okay? You got to make a $1,000 payment every month. Well, guess what? Your options are the following. If you shut down, you still got to make that $1,000 payment. If you continue to operate, then you'll have a little left over from paying your workers, your total variable cost, to pay a portion of your fixed cost. Does that make sense? So in the short run, continue to operate, okay? Continue to operate whenever the price is in this range here between average total cost and average variable cost. In the short run. Now, not in the long run. You can put up with this for a month or two. In the short run, continue to operate. Not in the long run. It's not smart to sustain or try to sustain negative profits indefinitely. Just not going to work, okay? Okay, I mean, it doesn't. So the idea is things are going to turn around and so forth. But for the moment, your choice may be, well, do I lose? Is my profit, again, for my example I mentioned, is it a negative $1,000 a month? Because if I shut down, I still got to pay the rent. Or is it a negative $800 or $180 a month? And I'd rather lose $180 a month than $1,000 a month, right? Wouldn't you? So it's the lesser of two evils is to continue to operate. Your loss is smaller. You still have a loss, but it's smaller. Very important concept here is that in the short run, continue to operate so long as this price is above actually minimum average variable cost. Okay? So long as it is above minimum average variable cost. So I'm writing myself a note here because I want to come back to a concept here. Now, what if, okay, again, this price fell even further. I think we see you wouldn't even want to operate in the short run. Okay, so let's just go back. Let me just sketch this diagram again since it's a concept day. Okay, maybe we'll look at problems with numbers again, but let me just, if you'll bear with me, I'll draw this again. I meant to photocopy this and just throw it up here, but this is okay. It's all right, so remember we have average total cost and average variable cost, and we have marginal cost that goes through them. Okay, price, and this is marginal cost, average total cost, average variable cost. And so what if now the price in the marketplace falls such that maybe it's this demand curve shift way to the left or something. This demand curve instead of going to the right shift way to the left, or supply or whatever, so that the price established in the marketplace is way down here. Wow, that's way down there. Okay, think about that just a second. So this is the new marginal revenue, MR, or average revenue curve. Again, the profit maximizing or loss minimizing supplier, both are rational actions here, is to equate marginal revenue and marginal cost. So you look at the intersection here, Q star comes to be here. Okay, now should you continue to operate in the short run? These are short run cost curves. These wouldn't exist this way in the long run. Would you operate here in the short run? Well, the revenue rectangle is down here. Price, which is this right here, times quantity is pretty small. Notice it's even smaller than your total variable cost rectangle. Okay? It's smaller than your total revenue cost rectangle. I hope this is making sense. Because your total revenue cost, I said total revenue cost, that makes no sense. Total variable cost. Your total variable cost is this big rectangle. Okay? So again, the profit here, profit would be, again, revenue minus total cost. Okay? And you have to go up here to get your total cost. But this certainly is going to be negative, as we see. But also, I want us to note that profit is not only, the negative here, because revenue is this little rectangle. Revenue is less than total variable cost. It's also less than total cost, which would be this rectangle. Let me go ahead and put it on here. Let me do this. Notice I'm going up to the ATC curve now, okay? Average total cost gives me the height of the total cost, okay? Average variable cost curve, which is here, gives me the height of the variable cost rectangle. And then the demand curve gives me the height of the revenue. So revenue is less than total cost, but also the profit is less than total what? Variable cost as well. Okay? That is to say, I should say, instead of profit, let's say revenue. Well, this is true, but let me just say, since profit is less than, since revenue, but also revenue is less than total variable cost. Not only is revenue less than total cost, which makes this less than zero, revenue is less than a part of this, which of course makes profit less than zero, but it means you're not even bringing in enough revenue to pay your workers. Okay, we think of workers, labor as being your variable input. So, if I'm going to label this the way I did the one just before it. So, here we go. So this is your revenue here. Well, this is your total variable cost here, right here. And this is your revenue. I'll just double hash this to that line. So this rectangle, there's revenue, and the bigger rectangle here is total variable cost. Y'all see that? Because, again, the revenue goes up to the individual demand curve, the price. It's price in the market times the quantity. Total variable cost is the average variable cost, which is a little higher here. It's a little bigger than the price over those units you're going to sell. So the revenue is smaller than your total variable cost. Not just total cost, but total variable cost. So in the short run, we can't cover our variable cost. We can't cover total variable cost, like pay your workers. Okay? If the price sinks far enough, then you're not going to bring in enough to even pay your workers. Now the question, what should you do in the short run? Does it make sense for revenue to be less than total variable cost for any length of time? And the answer to that is no. If you don't have a little left over after paying your workers, then you're not going to pay down any of your fixed costs. Okay? So, shut down. Okay? And you're just digging your hole deeper now. You're incurring total fixed cost, which is this rectangle up here. You still got to pay that $1,000 rent. But then on top of that, you got to scrape up some money to pay your workers. So this is called the shutdown condition, the short run shutdown condition. Okay? And so we can put this in words. Shut down when the price is below minimum average variable cost. Okay? As we see here, let me just write it on this one here. The firm should shut down, certainly in the short run, but also if this persists for the long run, you stay shut down. But shut down if price is less than minimum average variable cost. So you look at the vertex on the average variable cost curve, and if the price is below that, you don't produce. Don't bring to market. Okay? That makes sense. All right, so the only really relevant part of the marginal cost curve to a supplier is that portion that is above minimum average variable cost. That's the only part that where we use this rule, marginal revenue equals marginal cost, to determine optimal output. Okay? If price falls below minimum average variable cost, you just ignore that. You just shut down. Q star is 0. Now this is an important thing to note, because what we see then as a result of that is that the marginal cost curve above minimum average variable cost gives us the rule, really for in perfect competition and only in perfect competition. It gives us the rule that exists between price and output for an individual supplier. The output that the individual supplier wants to produce. So what I'm saying is the following. There's my straight edge again. But here's A, V, C, and of course through the vertex of that is marginal cost. And then I'm going to do a dashed line for the rest of this. And it is the portion of the marginal cost curve above minimum average cost that gives us a relationship between price and quantity of output. Okay? So I'm going to draw these arrows this way. This part of the marginal cost curve gives us a rule between price and output. The quantity the supplier will bring to market. Okay, let's think about that a second. You have above a certain price here. Now over here you shut down. So the quantity that the smart supplier will bring to market will be over here. So there's really two segments to something we're deriving here. But this is what's most important to us. We have a rule here from this graph that tells us what level of output, you can put a star there if you want, but what level of output will the rational supplier bring to market at this price? Okay? So you have an upward sloping curve that gives you quantity supplied to price. What do you think we're going to call this portion of the marginal cost curve that's above minimum average variable cost then? What do you think, what kind of curve is that? Okay, again, this is the rule that tells you the quantity supplied as a function of the price. So it's a supply curve, okay? The marginal cost curve above minimum average variable cost is the individual supply curve, okay? That is the individual supply curve. We've talked about individual supply before. We talked about how you get the market supply from individual supply, also market demand from individual demand. First off, just want to lean on this a little bit, make sure we grab this concept that the marginal cost curve for the typical supplier here is that individual supplier's supply curve. This is what they'll bring to market at various prices because it gives the rule that extends from price to quantity supplied. So this is S sub I. Now if you have one supplier in the market, it's also the market supplier. They call that a market supply, or they call that a monopoly. Okay? If you have only one supplier, then you got a monopolistic situation. Now we're in perfect competition, so guess what? There's lots of wheat farmers that have this curve. Or there's lots of avocado farmers that have this curve. So let's go back to the market a second here and let's think about this. Again, in the market for wheat or whatever, how is it we get the market supply curve? Well, you take these individual supply curves. Okay, here's one, and S1, and S2 and so forth, okay? And you add them horizontally. For the individual, you add the individual suppliers. So you're going to add those curves horizontally. So I want to write that here horizontally. If you have 1,000 wheat farmers, okay, that's ideal. And they're all kind of facing this curve right here. Guess what? You produce the market supply by horizontally adding those 1,000 curves. Now, let's just suppose, they're all using the same technology. And at a price of $10, they bring 1,000 bushels to market. Okay? So at a price of $10, and I'm going to put a little q here and a capital Q here. Let's look at the market. Suppose that there are 1,000 suppliers. Okay? Then the market will have a market supply curve way out here, so that at the price of $10, you're adding 1,000 of 1,000s. So this would be 1,000,000, right? Okay, 1,000,000 bushels. If you have 1,000 identical suppliers facing the same technology. Okay, now if one has superior technology, or someone's got super rich soil, wheat farm, whatever it is, then this is going to be a little different. But if they're all the same, you just use horizontal addition. And so that makes the market supply curve. Okay? The market supply curve. Okay, so, all right. This is, in both cases here, if I extend this on down, there's a minimum price at which the market will bring supply to the market, the supply side of the market. And that's going to be wherever minimum average variable cost is. So here's the minimum for this supplier. It's going to be typically for every supplier. So wherever the minimum average variable cost is, again, maybe that's $8, whatever it is, that's going to be $8 over here. And that's where the market supply curve starts. Okay, so here's the deal. Your book talks a little bit about do not commit the fallacy of composition. Have you heard of that? Fallacy. What's true for one is not true for the whole. And this is going to get us into the long run just a little bit. This is profit maximizing in the short run. But in the long run, you can have these sorts of things happen, like they have here in figure 10.8. And this might seem to be a violation of what we just talked about here, is that, an individual supplier is a price taker. They might bring more or less wheat to the market. They can't affect the market price of wheat because the biggest wheat farmer is a little person. But alas, that's not true if every supplier operates in concert. If every supplier operates in concert, then you can shift the market supply curve. Okay? So do not commit the fallacy of composition. Okay? Well, the fallacy of composition is such that, what's true for the individual is not necessarily true for the whole. They give you some funny examples of this. When we get to the long run, I want you to read this here, but they show another picture here and we'll get into long run adjustments to this picture with the long run supply. I'm just giving you a look ahead here. But I think, I'm looking here, where do they talk about, I'm probably making you seasick here, fallacy of composition, because they have some neat, here we go, fallacy of composition, firm versus industry. I want to focus on that just a little bit. The individual firm in perfect competition is a price taker. But if the individual firms get together and operate together, they're not price takers anymore. They affect the price. So what's true for the individual firm is not true for the industry as a whole. To say it is to commit the fallacy of composition. So read through this. They give you some examples. I think this is kind of humorous, but it is true that atoms are not alive, right? An atom's not alive. But it's false to generalize from that fact and conclude that nothing made of atoms is alive. Okay? That would be kind of silly, right? Here's another fallacy of composition. You may leap to your feet to see an outstanding play at a football game. So you're operating on this conclusion, or this fact, I guess you will, that if I stand on my feet, I get a better view of that play that's undergoing. I see that pass there. Is he going to catch it? I want to stand on my feet. You get a better view. But guess what? If everybody stands to their feet, including the row ahead of you, you don't get a better view. So again, that principle you applied there for yourself does not extend to the whole. An individual stockholder can sell shares of, say, Google without affecting the price of the stock. Most stocks are this way. The stock market's not completely efficient. You can get into the efficient market hypothesis if you study finance and so forth. But the thing is, it's a little sticky. Prices are a little sticky. So if you sell your Google stock, you're probably not going to drive down the price of Google stock, just yourself, unless you're a big shareholder, okay? But just because that's true doesn't mean that if a bunch of people who own Google stock sell it in one day, they can't drive down the price, right? Maybe there's a bad earnings report or something like that. Of course, when suppliers band together, they can affect the market price, but an individual supplier cannot. So that's what's going on here. Where's my picture? When we're talking about this right here, first off, is that when suppliers band together, they can shift this curve left and right if they band together, and they can affect the market price, okay? The price at which the market equilibrates. Now there's this picture. So what we've done today is we kind of talked about concepts here in the short run. Marginal cost, here's a page 206, marginal cost and short run supply. Notice again, you want to spend a little time with this. This is one of those chapters you really just need to not only put your book under your pillow at night and hope it seeps through by osmosis, okay? I've tried that. I've tried everything. I guess you could have, you could read this book out loud, record it, and have it played back to you in your sleep. Probably learn something that way. But I'm being a little silly. But this is some material you want to spend quite a bit of time with so that it's in your gut, okay? And this picture in particular is very, very important. You'll see this marginal cost curve is solid down to this point right here that has a minimum average variable cost, and then it becomes dashed. So all these concepts we've talked about here today in our brief time together is illustrated not only by these points here in this diagram that correspond to differing levels of marginal revenue or price, but also to these pictures that we've talked about. So here's a picture, but a picture is worth 1,000 words. Even your author is certainly worth more than 1,000 of my words. Okay, but they go through each of these. So they'll talk about the price P1, what's happening at P1. Well, prices down here don't operate at all, okay? At price P2, what are they saying? It's just equal to the minimum average variable cost. So right here is when you begin at this price you begin to think, hey, for a little while, at least as long as I got this lease hanging over my head, you're in the short run. At least as long as I got to pay the building lease or lease on the machinery, things are beginning to look like I should operate. So from this price upward, you operate. So you shut down less than that. But you wouldn't want to do that in the long run, right? You're not going to continue to operate in the long run until the price extends up to P4. At P4 here, you see, you're beginning to what? Break even. All right, you're beginning to break even here. All right, so when they say break even point, your profit here, it's your economic profit, is what? What's the value of your economic profit when you break even? When you break even, what's your profit? Okay, it's zero, right? Okay, it's zero. You break even. Profit zero. Economic profit zero. Now, when I say economic profit, you're covering your implicit cost as well as your explicit cost. So you're earning what's called a normal profit at this price here. Above that, you're earning positive economic profits. So this picture I had a while ago, and it's also in your book, here with the green rectangle, I remember seeing this here. Economic profits, positive here. Now guess what? In the last few seconds we got remaining, when the economic profit is zero, other people with your same background are going to want to go into this industry. And so this will be the lure for capital in the industry. More firms are going to come into the industry when this is greater than zero. Okay, that's all we have time for today. Okay.